Thank you for having me and thank you for being here. This, I know, is a little bit of a stressful time of year for a lot of people. I mean, I think we can all just acknowledge that it's been a stressful 12 months for all of us anyway, just because of everything going on in the world. Um, However, brighter days hopefully are ahead. But as far as academia is concerned, I know a lot of you, as Daisy mentioned, are thinking about graduate school interviews for some of you, or maybe you're finishing up your undergrad right now and you're starting to like panic because you realize like, oh my gosh, I got to go somewhere and do something after this, right? Those of you who are seniors out there. So I think there's going to be a lot of good ideas that you might get today as you hear some of the stories from some other folks who have been in your shoes not too long ago. Or maybe you're a junior or sophomore or earlier on in college. And if so, now is a great time for you to be thinking about some of these things. Actually, it's probably best not to wait until the very end when you need something to do to try to make these decisions when you're in stress mode. So thanks for being here. I've been director of the post-bac program at UNC, the PrEP, for the last 11 years. And it's really hard to believe that some of my first students are now becoming faculty and industry leaders and things in their own right, which is really exciting. And then more recently, I've been involved in graduate admissions at the PhD level. I direct admissions for the BBSP program at UNC. Maybe some of you are applying there. If so, let me know that actually. We're gearing up for virtual interviews, which is really different this year. If that's something that you're doing, whether for a prep program or for grad school, and you have some anxiety about doing virtual interviews, I want to mention that, again, the Hello PhD podcast, we actually have done some episodes about how to be successful in virtual interviews and what to expect from that really unique step that we face this year. So definitely check that out. And then the last thing that's on the slide, one of the things that I'm probably most excited about that I've been involved with over the last few years is doing research on graduate school and doing research particularly on graduate admissions. And one of the things that we discovered through this research was that things like the GRE are particularly poor at determining who will do well in graduate school, which is kind of ironic because the GRE has been a critical part of grad school admissions for decades. And once we really started looking, not just myself, but other researchers at other institutions who all found the same thing, and that is the GRE is not good at telling us anything about who is going to do well as a researcher and in graduate school. And I want to give a lot of credit to Aníbal, who's one of the presenters tonight. He's been instrumentally helpful in helping to curate this list, biogre.info, and there are now, I believe, over 350 programs on this list, PhD programs that have dropped the GRE requirement. If you can believe it, 3 years ago, there were less than 10, and now it's almost every program. So as we're talking tonight about graduate school and certainly about post-bac programs, the GRE may very well be something you don't even need to worry about. And I'm very excited to say that that is the case. So that is me, and I'm looking forward to talking to you more tonight.
All right, so hi, my name is Yessica Santana. As Daisy mentioned before, I am a first year neuroscience PhD student here at the Oregon Health and Sciences University. I had a very different background. I graduated in 2017 with a major in global studies, but I did some fun psychology research for 3 years, and I liked that, but I wanted to take it to a more biological setting. So I knew I was gonna have to take a few years off to like go into that. So I mentioned I did Daisy mentioned that I did 2 post-bac programs. These are independent post-bac programs, which I'm going to talk about later. I did the Hot Metal Bridge post-bac program at the University of Pittsburgh, which encompasses various departments, which includes neurobiology. And what's cool about them is that they accepted students who wanted to change careers, kind of like me. So I did that. And then I did a second post-bac here where I am now, which is entirely just focused on neuroscience. And yeah, I mean, I applied to grad school twice. The first time I did it, I was encouraged despite me having really massive fears. And I got one acceptance. I decided I still wasn't ready, considering that I didn't really have a niche that I wanted to follow. And even within the field of neuroscience, I thought that I liked something, but I actually like something else, which is something that's very common in these post-bac programs. And when I applied last year, I applied to 8 schools and I got into 3 of them. And I decided to stay here because I really love this program. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. So everyone, hey, my name is Aníbal. I go by he, him, his. And I'm my first year at Biochem in University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I graduated from University of Puerto Rico at Rio Piedras. And I did relatively quite a bit of research during the summers of my undergrad. And that is very important to remember because as I'm gonna talk later, sometimes that might not be enough. And yeah, after I graduated, after I graduated from undergrad, I applied to grad school, 10 programs, no interviews, no one even invited me. And then I applied for a prep program at Case Western Reserve University. And after that prep program, I applied again to those same 10 universities and got interviews and acceptances from all of them. So this is proven, all right? This is a really great program that NIH promotes. And we'll be talking about the succinct differences between saying post-bac and maybe NIH sponsored post-bac. So if you can keep going, Daisy. First of all, let's start with what is a post-bac. And the post-bac experience allows you to do quite a bit of things. First of all, it allows you to expand your research opportunities. As I mentioned, I did 3 summers of research. However, these are very short research experiences. And I realized after my first application cycle that maybe committees actually wanted to see longer commitment to our research project. And if that is the case, this is a perfect opportunity for you because you get a whole year of research for PhD prep programs. And for MD PhD prep programs, you get even 2 years of research, which really enhance your CV and your confidence as a scientist. If you are interested in exploring a career in science, this is also a great opportunity. And also you are able to participate in groundbreaking research and be able to publish and even present at post-bac conferences, although that's not written in stone because you get a project and it will depend on what stage the project is. Some projects are far ahead that in 1 year you can get data to publish, others do not. However, the experience that you get just being exposed to constant research is worth the whole year experience. So you can actually retake undergrad courses if you did poorly in some of them. That will depend on the program, as well as some specific details that we'll be discussing. And you also get to take graduate courses. So as I said, my undergrad was in Puerto Rico, where we talk Spanish in university, and everything is basically, even the research is talked in Spanish. And when I got to the prep program, I realized that I needed to think in English constantly. And that was a change. So I think the biggest thing I got from my prep program was that being able to actually begin thinking in science constantly in English. So that is a simulated graduate student experience. And I am very glad that I had a whole year to learn the process before I entered grad school, because I learned how to think like an independent scientist, and my communication skills were much better than they would have been if I had gone directly from undergrad into PhD. So this is a great moment to figure out whether graduate school is the right path for you. And yeah, this is a general timeline of the post-bac programs. Applications start now. They start very soon, actually. So as Josh mentioned earlier, this is a great moment to be talking about post-bac, and I'm very glad y'all are here because applications go from February to April. The programs actually begin August to September, and they end after a year around May to June. So some postbaccs have the opportunity to be extended up to 1 year more, so 2 years, but that will depend on the program director, your specific circumstances, if depending how your PhD interview season went. And yeah, PhD-oriented postbaccs are 1 year, and they, as I mentioned, can be up to 2. However, MD PhD postbaccs, which are actually the less common of postbaccs, are up to 2 years. And this is because they have a different application cycle. You have clinical rotations, which some programs offer, and even MCAT preparation. So that's kind of a general breakthrough. So now I'll pass it off to Jessica. Sorry.
All right, so how do I choose a post-bac program? If you go to the next slide. Okay, so there's a wide variety of post-bac programs, and stuff can get very overwhelming in trying to decide which one is best for you. Mainly because some post-bac programs are emphasized in certain departments, and maybe one of those departments isn't exactly what you want, or it is, or it isn't. How do I find one? Where do we start? Here we have a breakdown of like what are the main components when you want to decide how to pick a post-bac program. And the first one is coursework. Post-bacs can be a great chance for you to either repeat or to take graduate level coursework. When I did my post-bac at Pittsburgh, I took both upper division and graduate level neuroscience courses. And that sort of option can be available for you to strengthen your transcript. Forgot the word. A lot of conferences now vocalize their post-bac opportunities, and some of those conferences are ABRCAMS, ACSB, SOCNUS, etc. And you can also attend these conferences when you go to a post-bac program. But if you've been to these conferences before, you may have seen flyers that promote such programs. Additionally, you can also decide whether you want your program to help you for your GRE, which is being phased out. But if it's really important to, if it's really important to you and for a specific program that you want to get into, there is training on that. The programs that I was in did not focus on that, since we're very not pro GRE, basically. And same thing with the TOEFL. And then here are 2 links for the databases that were talked about before. The cool thing about post-bac program is that you don't pay anything. So it's a 1 to 2 year program where you're gonna get a salary. You do not have to pay to be there. And on top of that, you also get health insurance, vision, and dental insurance, which is great, which is takes off a lot of pressure. For example, when doing unpaid internships, which I think many of us have experienced before. And then I'll go more into detail about the the difference between how internal and external funding work. But basically, there's 2 big categories of post-bac programs. And one of them are internally funded, which just basically means that the school pays for the program itself. And the other ones are the PrEP programs, which are funded by the NIH. And generally, you also want to determine what sort of strengths the post-bac program has that will help you. There's going to be a lot of, I guess, commonalities between them. And here are some of them that are listed, which are like weekly meetings with the program directors and with your PIs, which is extremely common. You will get personal feedback on your statements and your CVs, and you'll likely get mock interviews, which is all stuff that I experienced in both my post-bac programs. So as I said, I'm gonna more so talk about the internally funded post-bac programs, because those are the 2 that I participated in. Basically, as I said before, if it's internally funded, it just means that it's not funded by the NIH. That's like the only difference. these sorts of programs are in the small minority of the total number of post-bac programs that there are. And I have this database that I linked through there, and we could check it out later. But basically, because it's internally funded, the school sets up what are their specific requirements and what they want you to do during that post-bac program. And I would say that like 90% of what I've done for both my post-bac programs is the same as a prep program. And the main reason why these programs are internally funded is that they're trying to apply to get a grant from the NIH to become a prep program. So yeah, the structure is pretty similar. Small things might change, such as GPA requirements, how many letters. I think for my Pittsburgh one, unless they changed it, I had to get 3, and then for OHSU, I had to get 2. Yeah, so, and similar to prep programs, these programs, sorry, I'm not sick, I'm just not drinking enough water, but basically your whole year will be split into 75% research, and then the rest is going to be dedicated to professional development or classes. So when I was in Pittsburgh, it was majority research, and then I took classes. Here at OHSU, it was mainly research and then professional development stuff. And I included some of the sample topics of like our little sessions that I had as a post-bac. And we were taught how to do pitches, like which basically when you're going to go on grad school interviews, you have to do your whole like spiel of like why you're interested in what you like, and you have to say it without stumbling like I am right now and such. And you'll also be trained on how to like write a manuscript, how to pick a mentor, and so on and so forth. And these are things that are known as the unwritten rules of grad school that no one really teaches you about, but these programs are meant to help you understand that so you can go forward. And as I said, you do get a stipend. It depends on the area. For both my programs, I got relocation expenses. I'm not sure, well, I guess later on we'll talk about it. And the stipends can vary, like they can classify you as a research assistant, which OHSU did for me, or a grad student, which Pittsburgh did for me. It's just like small little nuances and such. Additionally, you'll be allowed to go to national conferences, as I've said before, with the other first-year graduate students. And you'll wrap up the year with some sort of like big project. For me here at OHSU, that was a poster and a mock manuscript. So I actually wrote this guide. I don't remember when anymore, time is a construct, but I wrote this guide talking about like the who, what, where, when, and why of what post-bac programs are. Also on the CL website, we have a repository of around 45 post-bac programs. Majority of them are prep programs, but there are a couple non-biomedical post-bac programs. So if you're a physics major who wants to go into PhD for physics or any related field of that topic, there's some in there. And here are some of the screenshots of the guide that I made. And yeah, that pretty much summarizes what these type of post-bac programs are. Oh, yeah, and I forgot my own experiences. These are photos of my times in Pittsburgh. So I guess the left hand of the screen is like photos of my time in Pittsburgh with my mentors. And the photos on the right half are my cohort at OHSU. Denisha, who is in the blue blazer all the way to the right, she is now at University of Rochester. Raquel in the dress is at the University of Virginia, and they're both in neuroscience programs now. So we went places.
I was muted again. All right, so let's talk about externally funded prep programs, post-bac programs, which are NIH funded. So you will see that there is this really nice map of the different post-bac prep programs around the US. So I will start referring to them as prep programs just to differentiate them from the internally funded post-bac programs that Yessica already talked about. So these PrEP programs, there's about 43 around the nation. All of these institutions are very well funded. That is actually one of the requirements that the NIH has in order to allow you to get a PrEP program in your institution. Additionally, these programs, as we've mentioned, are geared in order to help underrepresented minorities. And this can be, as you will see in the link that we will share with all the slide deck. What is an underrepresented minority has many definitions. You have ethnic minorities, which are Black or African Americans, Native Americans, Alaska Natives, Hawaiian Natives, Pacific Islanders. There are also, if you have any type of visible or invisible impairment, that would also be a type of minority that under the NIH guidelines. And you can get all that info in that link, which we'll share in a bit, and we'll share with the slide deck. Now, as Yessica did mention, there's a split. So you'll be a whole year doing research and developing your skills. You'll be doing the research, being in the lab most of the time. And then for the 25% skill development, it's basically what was mentioned. You also get a curriculum vitae support, personal statement support. You also get help preparing, what schools actually are good for you. So I didn't learn what a dream school or what a dream school was before getting to this program. And it's because they know that you need to have, when you're choosing where to apply for grad school, you need to have a kind of like a spectrum of schools that are maybe reach schools, but other schools which with your credentials, you can totally get in. So they really help you fine tune this process. The tip is give an extra 10% for your future self. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, but all of you, I know, are given the extra 10% by just being here. So first of all, give yourself a round of applause because you are preparing yourself to be better applicants, right? Now, all of these programs I mentioned are geared to help diversity and increase the diversity in STEM, right? And most of the conferences that I linked earlier, ARICAMS, AESCB, all have very strong diverse communities in their national conferences, which happen every year, right? And the PrEP programs usually help you get to these conferences. In fact, the ARICAMS I went last year, we actually had just a meeting of PrEP programs. So that was really cool, being able to meet PrEP students from all across the country. Now, the stipend, as Yessica mentioned, is very similar. It's about 27 to 30K. I saw someone ask about if that was a livable stipend. I can talk for Cleveland, Ohio, and the Case Western Reserve PrEP, and that is actually a very livable stipend. And I'll give you a little more detail in a bit of how livable it is. So regarding standardized testing, we got preparation, but I talked with the directors this year, and they're saying that they'll probably make it optional for you to get support with the GRE, depending if your programs need it. There are still many Ivy Leagues that require the GRE. So, and specific programs, not every Ivy League and every program. So yeah, check out BioGRE for the third time. Really, it's important to understand where you're applying and what they're asking for, as well as the TOEFL. As a student from Puerto Rico, many universities really don't understand that the university that Puerto Rico has two official languages, English and Spanish. And so but they still don't get that, and they may ask for the TOEFL. And programs can actually support you with that as well. Now, if you can go to the next slide. My experience as a PrEP scholar was really, really fun. I was working in a mitochondrial lab. Basically, I was studying a fission protein that basically splits up the mitochondria. As you may see on the lower left corner, that was me in ARICAMS with all my peers from the PrEP program. I also got a lot of memes from that year. And yeah, going back to the salary and the stipend, well, it's technically a salary. I actually managed to, when I say give my 10%, I managed to coordinate with my PrEP directors to finish a previous project I was working on in Puerto Rico to launch an experiment in a rocket to space. And I actually managed to take 2 trips to different NASA locations in the weekends to be able to launch rockets into space. As you'll see in the top right corner, there's no rocket there, but we launched the rocket. And the lower right corner, I actually went to Houston, Texas to be able to establish a collaboration between University of Puerto Rico and the Astromaterials Research and Exploration Science team in order to be able to make a connection between the university and this national, NASA. So that was really fulfilling for me. And that building you'll see in the back is where they say, Houston, we have a problem. So that was kind of iconic. And yeah, again, that's what I kind of did. I worked that extra 10% to build my experiences and research in order to make really compelling arguments during my personal statements. However, there are some other peers that gave that 10% in another kind of way. I have friends who actually got fellowships. So the NSF GRFP, they applied as a prep student. And that is a really great moment to also apply for those types of fellowships, since they also have like limits between when you can apply. And even when you apply, if you apply as a prep scholar, it's not as competitive as when you apply as a graduate student. So knowing those little details is very important. And again, it's that extra 10% is for you. This is a really great program, and that's my pitch. Right. So,
all right, I think this is my part, and there have started to be some questions in the chat that I think are really relevant to this part of the talk. And so if Yessica and Aníbal have gotten you interested that this might be a really cool step to take for your career, then this part of the talk is going to be a lot more practical. So we're going to talk now about what do you need to apply to these programs. So maybe you've decided this sounds really cool. How can I be as competitive as possible for a prep or for one of these internally funded programs or for the NIH program? They're going to be slightly different depending on the program, but I think there's some common threads that are probably similar among these programs. Although you should take with a grain of salt that my experiences with prep, with my program specifically, but the prep community is a pretty close community, and so there's a lot of communication among the different programs. So I feel pretty confident that the advice I'm going to share with you tonight is going to be really useful applying to any of these prep programs across the country. So the first thing is your grades, so transcripts from your undergraduate work. And one thing that I think is really another useful part of applying to prep programs is that in some ways it's kind of a test run for applying to graduate school, because a lot of the things I'm going to tell you about that you need to apply and be competitive for prep programs, you also need to apply to and be competitive for graduate school, right? And so one of the things that you will submit will be a transcript of the classes you've taken and of the grades that you've received in your undergraduate work. And so one thing I always like to tell undergraduates, so I know some of you maybe have finished up already, but some of you may still be in your undergrad, is now is really the time that you can have the biggest impact on your GPA, obviously, right? Because you're still in the middle of taking the classes. Now, once you finish undergrad, your grades kind of are what they are, and your transcript is what it is, and there's not a lot you can do about it. It's really not the end of the world, depending on what grades you do have. Like if you've got some grades that you think are not great, if you got a D in organic chemistry, it happens to a lot of people, and it's not the end of your career, I promise you. It's probably worth noting here too, that in all that research that we did on predicting students to be successful in graduate school, I mentioned the GRE, but it turns out your undergraduate GPA is also pretty bad at predicting how well you're going to do in grad school. So if you had bad grades in grad school, that doesn't mean you're going to be a bad researcher or a bad grad student. Now the flip side is maybe you had really great grades in undergrad, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be awesome in grad school either. So that's the flip side of the coin. But it is a part of the application. And so one thing you should know is that admissions committees don't just look at the number, but they look at a lot of information in your transcript. So they're looking also at the trajectory of your grades. So not they don't necessarily care as much of how did you do your freshman year, right? But how did you do over time? Did your grades consistently improve? What was your final couple semesters like? Like, how did you finish? Because that's more recent too. So that's one of the things they're going to look at. And also the chances are once you became closer to the end of your undergrad experience, that's probably when you were taking more upper level biology classes and more coursework that was relevant to the type of PhD program or post-bac program you're going to do. So those grades are probably more important. The grades you got in maybe your molecular biology class, your genetics class, your chemistry class, is a lot more important than how you did in your underwater basket weaving class or your swimming class, right? Those things are less important. But I do want to make sure I say too is, even if you think your GPA is low, don't let that hold you back, right? I can say in our prep over the last 5 years, every year we have had at least one, sometimes more than one student with GPAs below 3. As low as 2.6, I think was one of the students we had in our program. All of them are now at really top PhD programs doing really well, right? So you should know it's not a not issue, and we're going to talk about what you do about that. But I want you to know that you certainly can overcome a low GPA. All right, so the next really important part of your application to a prep or to graduate school really is your personal statement. So your application to all these programs is a bunch of data, a bunch of numbers, but the personal statement is really your chance to provide some context for the rest of your application, right? Your transcript has grades, but there's a lot more to it. It doesn't always tell the whole story. Maybe you were working to support yourself through school. Maybe you were helping to take care of a family member. Maybe you just had something traumatic that was happening to you during your undergraduate. I know we've worked with a lot of students from Puerto Rico during times of academic strikes, during times of hurricanes that knocked the power out for months and months. Like, these are really important things that you should highlight in your personal statement to provide some important context for what you were dealing with while you were taking these classes, right? Now, some of the important things to make sure you mention in your statement, though, is you need to be really clear about what your goals are and why you want to be in that program that you're applying for, right? So if you are applying for a prep, you should know what the goals of that prep are. And I can say that from NIH's perspective, the ones that are funded by NIH, the ultimate goal is to help students prepare to transition into biomedical PhD or MD PhD programs. So hopefully your goal is one of those things, right? If your goal is to go to dental school or to go to medical school, then that's probably not a good fit for a prep, right? And so what you want to be really clear of in your statement is that your goals align with the goals of the program, right? And then you also want to talk a little bit about why you have those goals, right? So for example, let's say you know that the goal of the UNC PREP program is to help prepare students for PhD programs. Well, you can say in your statement that that's my goal. Your goals are my goals too. I want to be in a biomedical PhD program. But then you can provide some evidence that that is the case, right? And some evidence you might provide is that you spent time looking for research opportunities while you were in undergrad. Aníbal did a good job talking about, as an undergrad, I think he said 3 different research experiences in different places, right? Those are really important indicators that, wow, he must have been really sincerely interested in research to go to that effort to pursue all those different research opportunities. So that's really important to talk about that. And then this is your time to talk about the research that you did do. So there's a little bit of, I guess, assessment that not just you did work. So maybe you write in your CV, oh, I spent a summer at Washington University doing research. Well, I can read that on your CV. So your statement is your chance to tell us that what role did you play in that research, and that you understood the goals of the research you were trying to do, that you understood what was going on there. So that's important. The last thing I'll say about this, well, actually 2 more things I want to say about this. One, your personal statement, this is the time for you to confront any weaknesses in your application. So we talked about those grades. Maybe you got that D in organic chemistry. Don't just hide from it and assume and hope that nobody notices. Someone will notice. But now's your chance to talk about it. You can say, oh yeah, you know, my grades this semester were really rough. I know that, but this is what was going on, right? And it's not making excuses. It's not, you know, you don't want to spend half of your statement talking about this, but this is your chance to provide that context about what was going on to address that weakness in your application. And then the last thing I'll say is, this is something you should get feedback on, right? This is a really important document and a really important part of your application to PrEP. So I would recommend that you get feedback if there's a trusted advisor that you have, or maybe a friend or colleague who is already in a PrEP program or in a graduate program. Seek feedback from them, help them to give you some feedback on your statement. If you have a research mentor that you feel particularly close to, that you wrote about that research experience in the statement, that's a great person to get some feedback, especially on that research part that you wrote about. They can help you there. Okay, so I saved this one for last because it is the most important. Okay, this is 100% the most important. And if you don't remember a single thing that I say tonight, I hope you remember this part. And that is, research experience is the most important thing that you can do to be more competitive for graduate school, of course, but also for post-bac programs. And you know, you might say, and it would be very fair of you to say this too, like, well, okay, I thought the goal of PrEP was to help you get more research experience. That is true. That is 100% true. But both Aníbal and Yessica gave great examples personally of, I mean, we mentioned Aníbal did 3 research experiences, and that's amazing, and applied to graduate school. And what happened? Didn't end up getting any acceptances. Now, I don't want that to scare you, right? Because on one hand, that sounds really scary. But look what happened next, right? He took that experience that made him, and I can guarantee Aníbal was a very, very competitive PrEP applicant, post-bac applicant. And just with 1 extra year of experience in PrEP, look what happened, right? Same schools, 10 acceptances, right? That's amazing. And that is a very common story, right? That happens for a lot of students. But one way you can really position yourself is to take advantage of opportunities to do research. And I think this is important for a lot of reasons, not just because you want to be competitive for these programs, but as all of the panelists can tell you, who are in graduate school right now, and I went through graduate school for microbiology, I got my PhD. Most of what you're doing in graduate school is research. You're working in the lab all day, every day, for a long time. And so to a certain extent, at least when you start one of these programs or you start graduate school, you have to really like research. Now, by the time you finish your PhD, you may decide to do lots of different things, lots of different careers that may be in the lab, they might not. But at least at the time that you're going into graduate school, it's a good idea that you really like working in the lab and you really like research. And the only way you know if that's true is to do research, is to get that research experience. And the last thing you want to do is jump into graduate school if you're not sure that research is something you want to do, right? And so I think that is where, as an undergrad, just getting experiences to try this stuff out, like try out research. I think you'll know, like if you do this, and I imagine a lot of us had this experience at some point in our undergrad, where we got involved in research for the first time or the second time, and we had a really good mentor. We were like, wow, this is cool. Like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be, right? And so I really recommend you get research experience as an undergrad. If you can at your institution, do that. But if there aren't opportunities at your institution, there's lots of really great summer research programs out there too. I know that's not the goal of this talk tonight, but that's something I really recommend. But then doing those research experiences, those will help you be competitive for PREPs and for other post-bac programs. Now, if we go to the next slide, one of the key ways that those research experiences help you, besides just knowing that research is something you want to do, is all of those faculty that you work with in those research opportunities are key people to write you letters of recommendation when you apply. So there was a question earlier about who should I ask to write my letters of recommendation. I put it in red because it's by far the best. And I can tell you, I'm director of admissions for a PhD program. I also lead admissions for our PrEP. What we really like to see is if on your resume, on your CV, you say, I did 2 research experiences. I did a research experience at my home institution. I did research experience over the summer. What we are going to then look for is we're going to really be looking for letters from the faculty advisors who led those labs, right? So if you did 3 research experiences and a program requires 3 letters, ideally those 3 faculty that you did research with will be the ones that write your letters. And the reason is what we're really looking for is what we're really trying to get at is your potential as a researcher. And one of the key data points in that is a letter of recommendation from someone who has worked with you as a researcher and has that frame of reference or point of view. Now, what if you have to provide 3 letters, but you haven't done 3 research experiences? Well, that's okay too. Certainly get letters from the faculty who you did do research with. And then you can kind of go down the line. I think if you're part of a program, so I imagine some of you might have been part of maybe a RISE program or a MARC program or maybe a McNair program or some sort of research science-based program on your campus. If that's true, then that program director could be a great person to write a letter for you. If you don't have that, then maybe a faculty person that you took a class with that knows your work really well. I might recommend that if there's someone you did more of a laboratory-based course with, that might be someone I would prioritize, because again, you want somebody that can speak to your ability as a researcher. However, if you have 3 or 4 faculty you've done research with, those are really the people you should prioritize to write your letters, if at all possible. And then the last thing, one thing I would probably, I would persuade you not to do is just get letters from people who know you really well outside of science or outside of academia, outside of school. Sometimes we see those letters from a trusted family friend, or maybe it's somebody who's really important out in the real world, like they've got a really cool job, they're the CEO of some company or whatever, but they're not really involved at all in science or in education. That's really not going to help you. I've seen letters from people's mom or dad, and that's not really, they hopefully would say nice things about you no matter what. So really you want to focus on those research mentors if you can. And then the last thing I'm going to say before we, I think, open it up to some questions is really going back to what I said at the very beginning. You know, it's important to realize that a lot of these post-bac programs have specific goals that they have as a program. I can tell you as a prep director, NIH has very specific, like they give us our goals for us, right? If we want to keep the grant. NIH's goals are that we do a good job preparing students for PhD programs and that our students do a good job of going to those programs and succeeding in those programs. And if enough of our students don't go to PhD programs, we will probably lose our funding at some point. So we really are invested in looking for students whose goals align with our goals, that have getting a PhD in a biomedical degree as a goal they have. So if that's what your goal is, I think there's really nothing better you can do than to do a prep or some other type of post-bac program. And I think that's all I've got to say, and I guess we can have some discussion now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Josh and Yessica and Aníbal. And so I'm popping back in. And so we're segueing into now the Q&A panel. Like I mentioned earlier, we did receive some of your pre-submitted questions through our Google form. And so we're going to begin with our first question. So I think Josh also, touched upon this a lot just earlier. And so when speaking about previous research experiences, what kind of reflections or insights do reviewers specifically look for, like ability to effectively communicate the research process, how the applicant has grown as a scientist, etc. So I'm opening up to all the panelists.
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. So I think what reviewers are looking for is they want to know, what role did you play in the research specifically? So like I said, on your CV, you could say, I worked in this lab from May until August over the summer. But what we don't know until we see your personal statement is, what exactly did you do? What was your project? What was your contribution to the research? And part of that too, though, is not just what you did, but as important is that you understood, or that it's very clear that you understood what you were doing. Like, what was the big picture of the work? So one thing you want to be careful about is when you're writing about your research in your statement, or if you're speaking about your research in an interview, this is not the time to be talking about microliters at this point, right? This is not a detailed methodology, right? This is very big picture, right? I understood not just what I was doing, but why I was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what you want to be able to do.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Yeah, I wanted to add, I feel like the most useful thing is to be able to communicate your research in a very relatively simple fashion. You need to make it exciting, but you also need to be descriptive. They need to be able to understand what you did. And reviewers are going to be, kind of reading a lot of applications. So just make sure, and this applies for both post-bac and PhD applications. You don't go into microliters. Just give them the 30,000 feet view and just what was your goal. So yeah, I feel like I'm echoing kind of what Josh said, but yeah.
Yessica, do you have anything to add or?
Not really. I am trying to answer as many questions as possible. So there's a lot right now. I've been typing like very fast. But no, I would say that what Joshua and Aníbal said is pretty much what they're looking for. I mean, I mentioned in some of the answers that I've been replying to that my number one advice from the applicant perspective is that these committees really want to know how this program is going to help you achieve your goals, both in the short term and the long term setting. And you have to be very clear, like basically like spell it out, even though it feels silly. Basically for my first one, I said, I am a career changer. I want more research in a wet lab, in a neuroscience lab. And they were like, okay, we'll let you in. Like you basically have to tell them why you need this program specifically. You can't just like dance around it. At least that's what I've been told.
Certainly.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Being very clear. Don't be afraid to be very direct and very clear. And I want to say too on this topic, I know we're talking about the research experience part, but one thing I see, because I read a lot of statement drafts, is Aníbal mentioned this, that faculty who are reviewing these review a lot, right? You got to imagine, put yourself in the perspective. You might be a faculty person someday reviewing applications, and you're sitting there, it's nighttime, you just put your kids in bed and you've got like 15 applications to read. You want your application to stand out, right? And so one of the things that I think applicants don't do is maybe you've got something that's really unique about you. Maybe you've got something that's really unique about your story or your experience or your motivation. Feel free to include that, right? Feel free to start with that. You don't want, yes, you want the research description to be there. That absolutely has to be there. But I read a lot where it really jumps right into, okay, hi, I'm Josh, and I worked in this lab, and then I worked in this lab, and then I worked in that lab, and your program sounds really great for my goals. Thanks. While you may be an awesome scientist, that doesn't stand out quite as much. That's not quite as, I'm not going to necessarily remember that, right? It may be important you have all that in there, but maybe tell me about, what was a challenge that you overcame? What was something that you faced that you persevered from on your journey through science and to science? And that can be useful to say too.
For sure. One last, I think, advice. I think that what you guys have touched upon, I haven't personally applied to post-bac programs or prep programs, but I think that the transition into writing a lot of these personal statements or SOP, statement of purpose essays, is that there is a difference between writing in like our humanities classes versus writing these essays. And so I just know that remembering writing my first draft for the first time, one of the grad students in my undergrad lab read it and was like, you sound like there's no confidence, right? And so I think that, phrases like, for example, I hypothesized, I aspire to, I think that those are also really key phrases and what Yessica was also touching upon, like be very direct. And so it's really weird, right? And so, but I think that, that's sort of like the style that I think a lot of perhaps reviewers might be looking for as well. Yeah. Okay. So that goes on into our second question. Who do you recommend my letter of recommendation writers to be? And so if I have a minor in the humanities, would it be a good idea to request an LOR from a humanities professor as to give reviewers a better understanding of who I am as a person? I think it also applies to a lot of those who maybe started off in college in the humanities, but then maybe transitioned into science or STEM later on in college. And so, yeah. If any of you guys would like to answer that.
Sorry, I was typing a response in the chat.
Yeah.
I think you might know what my answer is going to be based on what I was just talking about. I would say possibly no. That it's, and I don't mean this in a way to make reviewers sound like they're bad people or they're mean, but they're very focused on what they're trying to do. And they probably, what they really want to know is they want an understanding of you as a potential researcher, right? Your potential in research. And so I don't think that necessarily, having a letter from a humanities professor is going to give you a lot of bang for the buck. Unless, I mean, the one caveat would be if you only had maybe one or two scientific research advisors to write you letters, and you need a third letter, and you've got someone in humanities that you work really closely with that knows you really well and knows your work really well, that could be a good third letter. But you certainly don't want that letter. What I wouldn't do is drop a research advisor off your list in order to put this humanities person on your list if you're applying to scientific programs.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add on that, and it's kind of a similar question that we have on the Q&A about if they don't have any research mentors to write them a letter of recommendation, then who do they ask? And that's kind of a hard question, but at least for a research program, my first research program, I just asked my chemistry professors. Although I'm not sure how that would look, but it is a potential alternative. So just keep that in mind.
There were a lot of questions in the chat. I know I'm only one person trying to answer all of them. So there were a bunch about letters. So apologies if I didn't get to your question. I'm trying my best, but
you're doing awesome.
Thank you. So Annabelle talked about what if you don't have any research mentors to write a letter of recommendation for. There was that. I saw another one. If I have no past research experiences, who would be best to ask a letter of recommendation for? So that kind of falls into what was spoken about before. Basically, I would say anyone who can attest to your capabilities as a student. And if you absolutely have no one who can attest to your research experiences, I would say it's fine to use, I mean, I've been told that it's fine to use a professor that you work very closely with. But it is kind of preferred, unfortunately, that you have some sort of connection beyond the classroom.
If anything, I think that also, because I also majored in museum studies. Oh no, like minored in museum studies. So I actually resonate with the person who asked this question a lot. And so I actually asked my professor, and he invested in me. And so I actually dabbled into research in the humanities. And so I did a lot of reading and a lot of interviewing. And so I think it's analogous to like a lot of STEM research, in that, resilience is still, it's like the common, thread, right? And so it's resilience, persistence. And so, yeah, I actually asked him to be one of my LOR writers, not necessarily for, PhD programs, but actually for a fellowship. And so he was very happy to write me one. And so I think that also touches upon what all the speakers were saying.
And I would also add, I mean, if my intro slide, I actually majored in global studies, and now I'm doing a PhD in neuroscience. When I first applied to my first post-bac program, granted, I had psychology professors writing my letters for a neurobiology post-bac program. So like, don't get hung up on the actual title of where you worked and where you want to be. Something is better than nothing.
Sure.
And I want to, one thing that hopefully could point out too through Yessica's story and Aníbal's story is don't get discouraged, if you don't get the outcome that you're hoping for immediately, right? Because it's not the end of the road, right? And you may actually find that some of these additional stepping stones where you gain additional experience might be really important experiences that have a huge impact on your career. And you might actually look back on and think, wow, if I would have gone straight into this program or would have gone straight into that experience, I might have been in real trouble, right? Or I might not have known as much about myself or what I was looking for, right? So, maybe you take a shot and you apply and you don't have great research experience, you don't have many people to write you letters, and it doesn't work out. Well, get some feedback and maybe you realize, okay, I do need a little more experience. Then you take that next step, which is, all right, I'm going to get some more experience. And, Yessica, she did 2 post-bac programs, right? Did one, didn't quite, wasn't willing to just jump into some next step that was the wrong one. But there's always, taking a little bit of time now to get some additional experience is never a bad thing, right? So just don't get discouraged. That would be my main advice.
Yep, for sure, 100%. Okay, third question. So, how competitive are post-bac prep programs? Is the application review process as rigorous as that of PhD applications?
Yeah, I really hate this question. The answer is probably it depends a little bit. It's probably like applying to any program or any school. It depends a little bit on the school and on the program and on lots of things that may or may not have anything to do with how good the program is. I can say, I don't know all the exact numbers for every program. I can say for ours, it is pretty competitive. I actually know the numbers for our PhD program and I know the numbers for our prep. And from a percentage standpoint, there are actually a lot of similarities, right? And so I could give you some numbers. So like for our prep, we have funding for 9 students every year, and we get about 200 applications, right? For our PhD, we have funding for about 90 students, and we get 2,000 applications. So from a percentage, that's almost identical, right? So from that perspective, I guess it can be as competitive, but the thing you should keep in mind though is what we're looking for is a little bit different for the PhD program and the prep. For the prep, honestly, we're really looking for potential, and we're really looking for that you've demonstrated that this is what you want to do. You just need some extra support to get there, because actually that's what we want. You should know too that we're not necessarily looking for applicants who don't need our help, I guess, if you could say that. Like, if we got someone who had, they've got years of research experience and a 4.0 GPA and everything's perfect, sometimes we might think like, well, why don't you just apply to grad school? Like, do you really need, do you really need prep? I mean, we're really trying to be a good stepping stone for students who really need prep. One of the things we've actually started doing in our program, because we have a close relationship with the PhD program, is a big component of our incoming class for prep are students who applied to our PhD and didn't get in. And so then they come to prep and since they didn't get in the PhD program. And so that's a population of students we really want to reach out to, or students who applied to PhD, it didn't work out for one reason or another, but who really have a lot of potential to help them get the extra experience they need to then apply again the next year and have different outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you for your input. Okay, going on to our fourth question. All right, I think this is more so directed towards Yessica and Aníbal. How has your post-bac program helped you gain confidence and build stronger skills both inside and outside the lab? If you experienced imposter syndrome, how did the program and its resources assist you in overcoming it?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, especially since the time for when imposter syndrome is the highest, I think, is when you're applying to grad school, because you start questioning yourself and you're like, can I really do this? And that becomes a really really difficult thing to overcome. So definitely, that's also something that we kind of answered in the Q&A in the chat, that people were asking, well, what's the difference between doing research as a tech and doing research in a program? Well, the thing is, you have this supporting group of people that actually really want you to succeed. And just being around them, having weekly meetings, and being someone to actually hold you accountable for, like, you know, the things you have to turn in, really helps you keep in track with this process. And so, yeah, I feel like when I got to interviews, as I talked so much about my research, not only with my lab, but also with these other groups of people, I actually was a better communicator. And like, I could communicate science at different degrees. And so, yeah, I think it does definitely help me. And we did have seminars addressing imposterism, and they are aware of this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to take a break from answering questions, but no, I'm going to answer. I'm going to try to answer it live. But okay, cool. This is a great question. I would say, if at the end of my first post-bac, I was still crippled with imposter syndrome. Not to say that I'm not experiencing that now, but you know, these post-bac programs, we all so here at OHSU, we also had sessions about imposter syndrome, how to say no, because it's very common as a graduate student to just say yes, yes, yes to like any small project and stuff, to the point that we're very overwhelmed with stuff. There's some nodding of the heads. So yeah, so I feel a lot more confident going into graduate school now than I did the year before. And when I first graduated college, I know there's a strong pressure to go into graduate school right after you finish undergrad. I know some of the questions touched on that. It's okay to take a break, and you'd be surprised to hear how many graduate students I know that went directly from their bachelor's or master's to PhD, and they say that it's very common, not every one of them, but it's very common for them to say that they wish they took a break because they're really burnt out. Oftentimes, maybe their interests changed. They thought they wanted to do something in this one specific field, but they found out that they like something else. Either way, I mentioned this in the questions. Many of these programs will allow you to apply 3 years after you graduate from undergrad. So I graduated in 2017. I didn't apply for Pittsburgh until a year later. Yeah.
Awesome. Yessica actually also touched upon, you know, or mentioned students who went directly into PhD programs like after graduating and got their bachelor's. And so I was one of them, and I can tell you that, yeah, I am very, you know, exhausted and tired, but especially when the onset of graduate school, I think that everyone in my core was like, yeah, let's get this, you know, it's the first year. And I was like, yeah, like, yeah. So I think it is important to take a break. And so also goes into, right, like work-life balance, of really like knowing yourself and, you know, seeing where your interests are. And so I think, yeah, post-bac prep programs are a great path to pursue right after college. And so I know that we're getting to like the end of the webinar. And so this is our last question. Yessica and Aníbal, they've been doing amazing fielding the questions in the chat box, but yeah, this is our last question. And so how should I determine whether I should apply to research assistant or tech positions, master's programs, or post-bac programs? Yeah.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these can be good things to do depending on what your goals are. You know, I think that is always the first step, is thinking about what are your goals and what do you want to accomplish. And, you know, if your goal is to eventually go on to graduate school and go to a research-based PhD program, then I think post-bac programs can be a really great way to go. I'm obviously very biased. Actually, this whole panel is probably extremely biased, except maybe Daisy, but the three of us are very biased. But one reason I think post-bac programs can be a great way to go is these programs, everything we do in these programs are focused to help you be ready for graduate school, right? So we want you to grow as a scientist. We want you to grow as a researcher. And that you are certainly going to do as a research assistant or a technician. You could get really great research experience. But there's that, I think Yessica talked about it, this extra 25% you do in a lot of these programs. That's going to be unique, I think, to a post-bac program, where you're going to get lots of opportunities to give presentations, do scientific writing, communication, go to conferences. You might get to do some of that as a technician, but maybe not. And I'm a big believer in cohort and being part of a group of people who are also on the same path that you are, to be there with you, to celebrate when things are good and to commiserate when things are bad. And just having some leaders who are invested in your success, to be some extra mentors outside of your lab, outside of your research advisor. Having multiple mentors is a really important thing too. I think a post-bac program really nicely provides just somebody else who's in your corner, another group of people who are in your corner, who really become your colleagues. And I imagine for our other panelists who are in post-bac programs, I bet you still keep in touch and have friendships and colleagues from people you met in your post-bac programs, even the ones you moved away from. And that's really, really important. Now, I will say, being a technician, also really good. Lots of our students, I answered this in one of the questions, but in our PhD program, 70% of the students who come in worked in research in some way outside of undergrad. So I guess said the other way, only 30% came straight out of undergrad. The rest did a post-bac program or master's degree or worked as a tech. Lots of people work as a tech before coming in. I think if you get a technician job, the most important thing is just to be clear with your PI what your goals are, and that you want to go on to graduate school to make sure you're getting training and growing as an independent scientist and not just processing samples all day. And then the last thing with the master's program, be careful about the master's program, because it really depends. There's a lot of variability in master's programs. If you go to a master's program that's mostly coursework and not a lot of research, you might actually find that you spent a lot of time and maybe in some cases money, and you're no more competitive for a PhD program than you were coming right out of undergrad if you would have got a technician position or gone to a post-bac.
Yeah, I think the detail, like the devil is in the details, and the master's programs, I actually thought about joining one of them as I graduated when I got those rejections. And there are a lot of little things that you should read up on before doing this move. Something else I wanted to add is that actually, being able to be supported financially was very important for me. So you also need to consider, because all of these opportunities will allow you to one way or another be independent researcher. However, the thing is, what will really make you stand out and really allow you to grow and be a great applicant? So yeah, I just wanted to add that. Be careful about master's programs, I guess. But again, I'm biased.
I'm going to answer the question, and there's one more actual question in the chat, which I know the least about, and I think there's a little bit of confusion. But so in trying to figure out whether you should do a research assistant or tech program or post-bac program or master's program, first off, I would say the same thing about master's program that was said before, especially if you're not in the financial position to pay for one, since master's programs are not typically funded for. Post-bac programs have accompanied professional development things about like the hidden, quote unquote, hidden rules about what's it like being in graduate school. If you really need that stuff, if you see it on their website, or you talk to the director, or you talk to previous post-bac students and you feel like you need that sort of stuff, then yes, absolutely apply for a post-bac. Research assistant or a technician position can be kind of a gamble, because the bonuses that these positions don't have that post-bac programs do is that you're going to work in a post-bac and your boss is going to know that you're going to apply for graduate school pretty soon. Whereas for research assistants and techs, you usually have to tell them at some point. And I know sometimes that can have like a difficult conversation. But the advantage to a research assistant or a tech position is that if you personally want more papers, you can work for a lab that puts technicians and research assistants on papers. And I know for really competitive research STEM programs, that's sort of desired. If that's not really your goal, look into other options. Additionally, if you just like are not so crunched on time, if you want to take your time to decide on what schools to apply for, definitely go for a research or a tech position. Oh, and I mean, I guess it was just answered, but there was a question and anyone else can answer it, is do I need the MCAT to apply to 2-year post-bac programs, specifically for MD, PhD? I want to say there are no, from my knowledge, there's no one specific post-bac program just for MD, PhDs. They're usually just for PhD STEM programs. And there's also post-bac programs for MDs, which is not the focus of this talk. There is a hyperlink in the guide that I posted in the chat. But I know there's a lot of questions of like, what should I do if I want to go for an MD, PhD? Basically just identify what your application needs. If it's more so like shadowing clinicians, physicians, if you want to redo some of your pre-med requirements or your upper division bioscience classes, go for the post-bac that's for MDs. But if you're lacking research experience or a paper perhaps, or any of those things, go for a PrEP program or any research or oriented post-bac program. So I can't tell you that. Like I can't tell you what to go for. You kind of have to like determine that for yourself, and it's a lot more complicated. Even with people that I've known before, who are MD, PhDs now, they kind of went in different ways because they have different wants and needs out of a post-bac program.
Yeah. Alrighty. Okay. We are over time, so thank you everyone for staying with us. And I learned so much from this webinar, just listening to the 3 of them. And so I hope that you guys took away a lot of things from this webinar. I also, in the very beginning of the webinar, I noticed that some people asked about, how will I access this webinar? And so I'll be posting the PDF if you are in our GSMI community in the GSMI members area in the webinars page. I always usually just hyperlink the actual PDF of the slide deck with everything that's hyperlinked, but I will also be listing all the URLs, all the resources that I've hyperlinked in this presentation underneath in that YouTube description. So it's all going to be open access. So don't worry about not accessing this talk. And so, yeah, thank you, Aníbal, Josh, Yessica, for being here and sharing with us your experiences, your story, your wisdom. So yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We're here for you guys. And so, I mean, these 3 speakers are like, they want to make everything open access, but also shedding light on, the various resources that you can tackle, right? Josh made this database of all the PhD programs that abolished the GRE requirement, Aníbal with the TOEFL requirement database and everything, and Yessica with her post-bac guide, right? And so these are the people that you want to connect with or ask questions regarding post-bac prep programs. And so, yeah, best of luck with your applications if you are applying, soon. So they're opening up soon. And so, yeah, wherever you are, a good, hope you guys have, a wonderful day. And yeah, so thank you guys so much. Have a good evening. Bye, guys.